feeder markets. And from what you're going to hear today, he is going to talk about a variety of things, but basically about our market, where we've been and where we're already going based on pacing. And it's been very exciting to work with Dylan, who knows our market just because of a relationship to the Albany market. So Dylan, you might want to just mention that you would know this area. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sheena. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great Thursday. Yes, I am from Albany, New York. Actually, I grew up, born and raised there. I lived up in Lake Placid for a little while too, so I know that drive. I've done it a million times. Been in Lake George many times. Was actually just up there in October. A fantastic place I spent a lot of time in. So it was a lot of fun to make this presentation. Also, just to be working alongside Gina and the team here. Giving all of you really a lot of data-driven opportunities. So let me jump into this presentation. If there's questions, I'm definitely happy to answer them in the end. I know that there's a lot of data here. I'm going to try to, explain it as best as I can. I'll try to make things simple, but again, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. So what I'm going to start with first is I want to discuss lodging data. And this is going to be through key data. And what we're doing here is we're tracking all of the chain hotels in the destination, giving you a lot of reports here. And what you're going to see is this data is based on year-to-date KPIs for 2025 compared to 2024 during the same period, right? So it went pretty much from January to early May now of 2024, comparing that to this year. And what we're going to see right away is that what we're looking at is going to be average stay value, which is, taking a look at that length of stay. Both of those are increasing right now. You're seeing people staying for longer. And the great news as well is that we're actually seeing the occupancy slightly up from last year. The ADR is slightly down. However, this is fantastic to see, considering the state of things right now. There's a lot of uncertainty right now in the market, and to see these numbers really was fantastic to view. When we look at short-term vacation rentals as well, we see similar numbers compared to last year. The ADR is slightly increased. The average stay value slightly decreased. People are staying, and that's really just due to people staying slightly less long. I mean, the difference between 3 days and 2.9 days isn't too much. And the occupancy is down from 12% to 11%. And then what are we seeing when we're talking about pacing, right? The great news is, with the Zartico lodging data, is that we can see these live transactions, so we can understand how we're pacing year over year, right? So what we look at when we look at the next 4 weeks, we're seeing actually a 26% increase year over year, which is fantastic. Next 8 weeks is actually 18%, and the next 12 weeks is 11%, almost 12% too. Now, we wanted to have this nationwide trend here, just so you can have that benchmark and understand exactly what's going on. And what you can clearly see, though, is that next 4 weeks, a lot of people are down, and they're just down year over year, right? It's down about 13%, and that's what we're seeing across the board. So to see all these positive numbers is fantastic, especially, in the hotels right now. This is definitely great to see. And what are we seeing with the short-term vacation rentals? Right, next 4 weeks, we're seeing it down actually about 17%. However, as we move into the summer season, we're really seeing some increases. We're seeing it up 6% over the next 8 and 12 weeks, respectively. Now, this is pacing a little bit behind the nationwide trend, right? It seems like the nationwide trend right now is actually a little bit more of an increase on the short-term vacation rentals. While there are increases, it doesn't pace with that national trend. However, at the same time, again, the hotels was pacing so far ahead, which was, of course, great to see. And now I want to take a look at some other data too. And we have this benchmark methodology that we wanted to do here. What we did was we identified 13 comparable destinations to Lake George. How we did this, we looked at population, we looked at some economic indicators, we looked at some key visitation drivers as well. And some of these examples would be like Finger Lakes, Lake Placid, Lake Tahoe, and many others kind of similar in that ballpark across the country. So what we did, we used our geolocation and spend data here to create some benchmarks and give you an idea of how you're actually really comparing to a lot of other destinations. And all of this data is going to be 2024 data, unless it's otherwise noted. So where do our visitors come from? So 52% of devices in the destination, right? So at any time, 52% of devices are visitors. That would mean that okay, 52% of devices are visitors, so the other 48 were the residents. Similar destinations right now have about 48% of devices that are visitors. So we're seeing more visitors in destination compared to those 13 other markets. And we're seeing 43% of visitors are from outside of New York, right? So we're seeing a lot of that in-state visitation, especially from that New York market, right? That New York City market is always going to be big. And it's important to note with that New York City market, as I said, DMA, it does span a little bit in New Jersey as well as into Connecticut. However, we're still looking right at in-state versus out-of-state about 43%. Again, that top origin market, so New York is about that New York DMA itself is about 1 out of 2 visitors. Albany it follows right up after that at about 8%, but you can see how big that New York City market is, and I'm going to have a lot more on them here in a minute. So how do visitors impact the economy? When we look at share of total spend from visitors, it's about 35% of all spend, which it would again mean, okay, if there was $100 spent just in Lake George, right, $35 is coming from visitors, and then that other $65 is coming from residents. So this is a really strong number here. You could see it paces ahead of the competitive markets as well. Again, a lot of money coming from visitors, and you could see almost $1 out of $2 at restaurants is coming from visitors as well. Retail is about 37%, attractions 48%, and then this local business spend is 31%. This is a little bit behind our competitive our comp here. However, at the same time, this is still really a high number. I work with a lot of different clients, many in New York, but many across the country as well. And to see a 31% mark is really good at local businesses. And for that definition there, that's looking at businesses that are sourced within Lake George. A lot of like mom and pop restaurants, more locally focused places. We're basically filtering out all the big box retail, any chain places, any places like Walmart or any gas stations as well. Accommodations are also not included in that too. So how are visitors experiencing the destination, right? And I love to see this number here on the far left. 50% of all devices are observed in an accommodation. Competitive markets see about 32%. So this means that the people that are coming to Lake George love to stay overnight. Simply put, right? There's going to be specific markets that probably don't, maybe like that Albany market. However, when people show up, they tend to be staying. And again, you can see that average stay value with about 2 days, about $249, and people are staying for about 2 days. So we're seeing, people really stay overnight, which is great. About 7% of people are observed at restaurants, 22% are observed in the outdoors, and then about 1% are observed at attractions. This attraction number may seem low. However, right, a lot of the other destinations that we compared against, attractions was like forefront for them. Think like the Finger Lakes and like the Museum of Art with the Corning Museum of Art, for example. And then who are the visitors, right? So when we break it down by the age range a bit, you could see that 18 to 34-year-olds, they make up about 24% of visitors. A lot of the visitors are going to be 35 and older. They tend to be a little bit older than the comp marks, right? About 38% for each of those age ranges you can see there. So that's really where the majority of visitors are made up. They also tend to have higher incomes. About 58% have a household income of over $100,000. And that's a lot higher than the average than we see. And about 37% have children in the household. So that was, again, a little bit more likely to have children. All of these numbers are great because this older demographic tends to have a little bit more discretionary income. So they show up and spend a bit more. Now I want to talk about some specific markets. So what we did here is we're basically taking a look at, okay, hey, we have all visitation, right? We can zoom into specific markets and say, hey, these markets are more likely to do this, more likely to be this age, more likely to have children, for example, and kind of compare them across the average visitor. So first thing I'm going to start here, I'm going to start with the right. The average age for these New York visitors are about 35 to 54. They tend to have a lot of money, about $150,000 is very common. And then about 13% more likely to have children in the household. So, this is definitely a market where a lot more families are coming with a lot more money. And what we could see here, I'm going to list off a few things. So New York visitors are very interested in food pages on the website. So when they're on that website before they show up, they're spending about 36% more time on food pages compared to the average visitor. And we can see that when they show up in destination, they're actually observed at food POIs 8% more often, right? So it seems like they're visiting those food pages before they show up. And then when they get into the destination, they're going to those actual those restaurants and stuff like that. What are we seeing when we're actually talking about visitation? So they're 114% more likely to visit Gore Mountain, about 198% more likely to visit the Million Dollar Beach, and about 96% more often observed at the Adirondack Outlet Mall. Now, about 71% of their spending comes from individuals with a household income of over $100,000. When we isolate that 150,000 bracket, that makes up about 45% of total spend, right? So just the $150,000 bracket is making up nearly half of their spend. When you loop in that 100,000, it's about 71%, which is a very strong number. Again, a lot of discretionary income there. And then what are we seeing about their actual spend? Where are they more likely to spend at? It's great to see this because they're 21% more likely to be spending at accommodations. So their spend is 21% higher at accommodations, and they're 16% more likely to be observed at accommodations. Why I highlighted both of those is because both those data sets don't talk to each other. However, they're both saying the same thing, right? It's similar like with the food pages on the website and the food actually showing up at a restaurant, right? We're trying to, make sure that we have as much data as possible. So it's great to see that they are really interacting with the accommodations. And a question, that I had when I did this was, well, where are these people from? Because the New York market, again, it is very large. So what I want to do on this next slide here is show that visitation by county based on those New York visitors. And you can see that a lot of them are in Suffolk, they're in Nassau, and then the Queens is actually makes up the third one there. The blue bar there is going to be 2024 data, and the gray bar is going to be 2023. So you can see that there actually was a growth within some of those Long Island counties there. You can see again that they kind of make up the top two. They make up a good amount of devices. And you can see the breakdown from there. Again, a lot of different counties are made up in this, but you could see some of the biggest drivers here. And then that Albany, New York visitor, right? So this is actually a little bit of an older demographic, right? About 55 and older, we tend to see. Their incomes tend to be about 100 to 150K. And they're actually a bit less likely to have children. Maybe they're a little older, so maybe their children have already left the household, for example. Those Albany visitors, they are really interacting with event pages, and this makes sense. It's a pretty easy drive to get up to Lake George. So they're actually on event pages about 105% more often than the average visitor. They are really likely also to be observed at outdoor recreation, and we're seeing this mostly at Coles Woods, Gore Mountain, and Brant Lake. We're seeing them 56% more likely to be observed at these POIs. They're also spending more time in the smaller regions, right? Places like Bolton, Johnsburg, Horicon, and less time in the major regions like the Lake George Village, Lake George itself, and then also Queensbury. Now, this doesn't mean that, they're spending, I guess, when I say this, they're just more likely to be in those smaller locations. They still do spend a majority of their time in the bigger ones. However, when we compare it to the average visitor, it's more likely to be, more towards Bolton, Johnsburg, or Horicon, if that makes any sense there. Also, 49% of their spending occurs from individuals who are over the age of 55. These visitors also spend the most on average per cardholder. So, not only are they spending the most just, in general, but they also spend the most on average. They also spend more on gas and service stations, about 53% more at gas stations and 48% more at attractions. What this tells me is, right, this is a great way to, fill up the weekends a bit. They might not stay overnight as much just due to the easier drive, but this is a great drive market to help fill visitation for sure. Now, I also want to talk about the Boston market, right? This is a great market. About 45 to 54 is what we're seeing in that age range. 100,000 plus, definitely, for sure. And then a little bit more likely to have children, about 7% more likely to have children. Again, this is another one that really enjoys outdoor recreation. 23% more time spent here. Also spending more time at arts and entertainment POIs as well, about 11% more likely. Now, Queensbury is very popular with these visitors. They love to be in Queensbury. They spend about 36% of their total time in Lake George in this region. So very likely to be in Queensbury. 45 to 54-year-olds spend the most of total, also and per card holder. They make up about 27% of spend, and on average spend $236 on average, which is a very high number, so that's great to see. 65% of their spending comes from individuals who make over $100,000, right? So most of their spending is coming from those people with a higher household income. And they're also spending about 24% more on accommodations, which again is telling me, hey, this is a really big overnight market. And then what are we seeing when we look at Hartford and New Haven, Connecticut visitors? Again, pretty similar age range to what we saw with that New York market, 35 to 54. Again, the household income, again, very high here, and 11% more likely to have children in the household. What's going on with this Hartford visitor? They're really interested in the major regions, right? Again, those Lake George Village area, about 20% more likely to be observed there, 5% more likely at Lake George itself, and in Queensbury, about 4% more likely. Again, that's also that more likely number, right? So that's going to be important to differentiate. So they actually spend 69% more on transportation, which tends to be boat rentals, and 44% more on arts and entertainment. So this is just some things that they are interacting with in the destination. 23% of the New Haven visitors are from the age of 35 to 44, which is the highest of all ages. Their average spend is about $192. Now, I did want to include that 45 to 54-year-old range, though, because they actually spend the most on average. So though, there's more people visiting that are 35 to 44, they're spending about $192 on average. When we compare that to the 45 to 54-year-olds, they're spending $252 on average. So, it can obviously add up, the more 45 to 54-year-olds, seems like they're going to spend a little bit more than really any other age group. And then what are we seeing with their visitation? They're observed at food POIs 4% more often, and they're also observed at accommodations 15% more often. And to tie into that, they're also spending 25% more at accommodations. So again, this is another great overnight market. I did want to highlight markets I felt that were really quality markets that also did have a strong footing in visitation. And these are, again, just some great examples of that. So what are some key takeaways here? There's a higher economic impact, especially when we're comparing similar destinations. We're really seeing a strong tourism economic influence on the local economy. There's really no other way around it. There's also a very affluent visitor demographic. Again, 58% of visitors earn 100,000 plus. And we're seeing this a lot with the older audiences. This is a very valuable demographic, simply put. Very high discretionary spending power and a lot of opportunity here. There's also a strong family appeal, and this makes sense. Knowing the destination, again, this is something that I've visited my whole life. There is a lot to do with families, and this really makes it an ideal location for those family-focused tourism initiatives. That's what we have here. I do appreciate everyone listening, and I'm happy to take any questions, and address anything that needs to be addressed.
I know Gina had a question.
Yeah, so and sorry, my internet is unstable today, and this is one day that I can't have it be unstable because I'm on Zoom all day today. Anyway, so when you were talking about the foodies, and it was really interesting when you were also showing the counties, and I saw a big rise in Dutchess County, which is the heart of the Hudson Valley, and a lot of foodies, and the Culinary Institute. I'm just wondering, as other folks are on this call, I mean, and the fact that you analyze so many other destinations as well, do we need to also do even more on our websites showing food and talking about that more because of those audiences that were so, I mean, I think about the Long Islanders and just that, I mean, those top counties that you showed, in addition to the Albany market, was from Westchester, up to the Hudson Valley. So I'm just, as I'm thinking about who's on here, Northern Living, you have a variety of properties, Holiday Inn Express, there's some things getting right into Glens Falls with regard to food nearby. I know I'm going to make sure to talk to Megan about some things on our website, both on Meet Lake George and on the Lake George Chamber, whether it's visuals and talking about chefs or because you noted that it was such a big deal. So I wanted to point that out because we all have ways to infuse that into our marketing, I think.
And Danielle had a question that's kind of related to that as well. Danielle, if you want to go ahead. Okay, I'm not sure if Danielle's mic's working, but she wanted to know, do you have any types of marketing campaigns into the feeder cities?
So if you're asking for us, from a CVB standpoint, our marketing is to the event planner. From a chamber perspective, we do a variety of things, from into those feeder markets, but it's been more globally, not necessarily individually. And I know Warren County Tourism, because they're our brand manager for for the leisure market, and they do connected TV among other things on Long Island and elsewhere, but I don't know exactly if there's a difference in the marketing campaigns into those feeder cities. Megan, I don't know if you have any other insights to that.
As in, are you asking if the messaging is varied based
Yeah,
on?
well, I'm not sure. Her question is, do you do any type of marketing campaigns into the feeder cities? So
Yeah, I mean, we use Zartico to really drive where we spend our dollars and the allocation of dollars. We also try, being the CVB being an extension of Warren County Tourism, we also are always trying to understand and know where they're sort of spending their money, because we piggyback on those markets as well. So yes, the answer, that's definitely kind of the driving force is using this data to sort of help with how we want to message, where we want to spend our dollars. And even on a meeting side, we still, like if Warren County Tourism is doing a big push in Boston over a certain period of time, we will actually come in with a meetings message as a follow-up to that and piggyback on those dollars to try to really push that message all at the same time. So does that sort of answer that, Gina?
I think so.
Perfect. Any other questions for Dylan or for any of the staff?
I did want to make sure if there's anybody on this call who we have not given access to our Zartico dashboard and data, just send me or Steve an email and we can send you an online just access. So we share this data where you can log in, and a lot of it Dylan showed today. There's a variety on our dashboard of places that you can look at, or you can dig into, if it's in Bolton and there's food, you can dig into where are they going, for that food. So there's a lot of ways to really dig into this data that could help you in your marketing efforts.
Perfect. Anybody else? Okay, well, that concludes today's program. A big thank you to Dylan for taking the time to share his insights with us today, and thank you all for joining. If you have any additional questions or need any further assistance, please feel free to reach out to any of the staff, me, Gina, anybody. And there will be a follow-up email going out with a copy of this recording. I know some of you joined a little bit late. And just a final housekeeping note, our next CVB meeting for June will be on June 19th. It's yet to be determined, but an email will go out letting you guys all know. If there's anybody that's interested in hosting it, please feel to reach out to me directly or to Brian. And other than that, thank you guys all for attending.
All right, everyone, have a great day.
Have a good day.